Hey guys, it's Camus here, and welcome to our exciting fifth round conclusion to the Atkins tournament. We've been following the progress of International Master Michael Basman, also the Grand Poobah of bizarre openings. And he played nothing but bizarre openings in this tournament, and somehow managed to win 4 out of 4 games. Now, at this point in the tournament, his win of the tournament is already assured because he got 4 points. His nearest competitor only had 3.5 at the end of the tournament, so he was already the winner. Of course, he was responsible for playing 2 of the guys that had 3.5 points, so I'm sure he was a major spoiler to their ambitions. Anyway, in this game, he's playing Tom Farrand. He's an expert, rated 2146, and he began with the white pieces, playing c4. Basman responded with g5. This is the Borg. And Basman considers 1c4 to be the best formation against which you can play the Borg. Probably due to the long dark square diagonal that c4 creates. Slight weakness there. Let's see how he handles the rest of the game. White played knight c3, bishop to g7 of course, g3, h5. Already advancing on the king's wing. His opponent plays d4. An advance on the wing is best countered by an advance in the center. g4. After d4, g5 was hanging. After g4, his opponent played h4, aiming to stop any further advance or break up the white kingside pawns. And now a thematic advance in the Borg and the Grob. c5, chipping away at white's center and hopefully increasing the pressure on this diagonal, maybe making it longer. White is probably best advised not to take the pawn here. After something like d takes c5, queen to a5, queen to d2, knight to a6, bishop to g2, queen to b4, knight to d5, hitting the queen, queen takes c4, queen to g5, hitting the bishop, and after bishop to d4, Rybka assesses this is about equal. Of course, this highly strange opening position is exactly the kind of position that Basman feels most at home, so probably best that he didn't go into this. After c5, he just supported his center with e3. It's a much better move. And now Basman plays knight c6, knight g to e2. No other way for that knight to develop. Knight to h6, bishop to g2. Now knight to f5. And now white decides to take off on c5 and make black spend a couple of tempi getting this pawn back. D takes c5, queen to a5. White just castles, and black recovers the pawn. Queen takes c5. Now, white plays knight to b5. And there's a threat of a fork on c7. So Basman plays king to f8, avoiding that. White plays e4. And after this move, Rybka considers that white has a clear advantage. Basman played knight to h6, knight to f4, knight to g8, queen to e2, a6, bishop e3, hitting the queen, queen to b4. Queen doesn't have a lot of squares. Knight to c7, and he's displacing this rook here, rook to b8. And now, white saw that his b pawn was attacked, and he defended it with rook to b8. Of course, you can't play b3 because of bishop takes rook. But better in this position would have been e5. e5, seemingly sacrificing a pawn, but let's see what happens. Bishop takes e5. Knight to d3, hitting the bishop and the queen. Queen to d6, pretty much the only move. Knight to d5. Something like b5, getting his light squared bishop out. c5, hitting the queen again. Queen to e6, only move. Knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. Bishop to d4. We're pinning the knight against the rook. So he'd have to play something like f6, and knight to f4, hitting the queen again. Queen to c4, praying for a queen trade. Queen to e3, knight to c6, knight to g6 check, king to g7, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, and then knight takes e7. Now knight takes knight leads to disaster after queen takes knight, so black would have to play queen to f7, and after knight takes c6, white is just winning, and black has a pretty miserable position. So this would have been better than the defense of the b pawn. So after rook to b8, instead of e5, he played rook a to b1. e6 was played, knight to d3, hitting the queen. See, the queen is very exposed in all of these lines. Queen to a5, hitting the knight on c7. But white has an in-between move here, bishop to c5 check. Knight g to e7, self-pinning, but he has to do something with his knight. Knight to d5 is a very interesting move, offering a piece sacrifice, and naturally it's a bad piece sacrifice to accept. If you took the knight, e takes d5, e takes d5. Queen to d8, protecting this pinned knight. D takes c6, d takes c6. After knight f4, things look pretty bad for black, and Rybka assesses this as completely won. I believe it. So Basman, fortunately, instead of taking the knight, played b5. White responded with b4, queen to d8, knight takes e7, knight takes e7. Now bishop to d6, and this is pretty lousy for black as well. He's got a real problem trying to activate his light squared bishop. I think we saw that in another game in this line. Maybe it wasn't this line. It was a similar pawn formation, one of the earlier games, that getting this light squared bishop out is a real problem. So black doesn't have very many options here. He tries rook to b7, but rook to b6 was probably better. But anyway, he played rook to b7. A very odd looking move, really. And now here, white could have played rook b to c1, king to e8, c takes b5, a takes b5, knight to c5, and white has got a raging attack here. It's hard to believe that black would survive. He didn't play that, though. After rook to b7, he played f3, which is not as strong. Basman played b takes c4. The knight came to c5. Now it's attacking the rook. So now he goes to b6. You can see now why rook to b6 was a better move. He's essentially wasted a tempo. And now white makes a very logical move, but a mistaken one. He plays e5. And what he should have done was play rook b to d1 because of black's next maneuver. So after e5, which was what was played, he allows black to play rook takes d6. And this is actually a pretty good exchange sack. I mean, Basman must have been desperate at this point. I mean, his position was just being tied up in knots. If he had played the rook to d1, as I recommended before in this other position here, in this position, if he played the rook over, then after the exchange sacrifice on d6, he could recapture with the rook and still have a pretty serious bind on the black position. Anyway, that was not played. He played e5, and Basman plays rook takes d6, an excellent move. E takes d6, knight to f5. And now you can see black is beginning to emerge from his difficulties somewhat. White played another poor move. He played f takes g4. Not sure if he saw the fork on g3 or he had intended on sacrificing the rook, as you'll see. f takes g4, knight takes g3, hitting the queen. And now there's this rook sacrifice. It's actually an exchange sacrifice. He plays rook takes f7. But this is unsound. Well, he shouldn't have played f takes g4 in the first place. After knight takes g3, simply queen takes c4, and he's restored equality. But after rook takes f7, black is now better. King takes f7. Queen to f3 check. The king retreats to g8. Queen takes g3. 8 takes g4. Queen takes g4. Queen takes h4. Queen takes h4. Rook takes h4. I'm not sure white had a choice about going into this endgame, but it's not an endgame that's better for him, unfortunately. After rook to d1, which was played, the c-pawn is already too strong. And had he played rook to c1, c3, knight e4, bishop to b7, pinning this knight, knight to f6 check, bishop takes f6, bishop takes b7, rook takes b4, bishop to c8, king to f7, bishop takes d7, rook to c4, rook to e1, e5, rook to c1, and c2. And this is just winning for black. At some point, he'll play bishop to g5, and that's pretty much going to be the end of it. Okay, he didn't play that. After rook takes h4, he played rook to d1, but it's not any better. c3, a3, and now bishop to h6. And white saw that the advance of the c-pawn was going to cost him a piece, so he resigned here. And Basman emerged with 5 out of 5. A likely epilogue to this game would have been something like knight to b3, covering the queening square. But after c2, rook to d3, rook to c4, king to f2, queens, knight takes, rook takes. Again, this is just simply winning for black. What can we say about these games? Well, Basman was much higher rated than all his opponents. He did play one master, who's rated about 100 points lower than him. In nearly all the games, Basman seemed to struggle, and he seemed to struggle directly as a result of the opening. So I can't say that any of these openings that he played the creepy crawly twice, and he played the Grob twice, and he played the Borg once. The Borg, of course, is just the Grob on the other side as black. But all of these games were pretty unconvincing. The first game with the creepy crawly was probably the best of the bizarre opening experiments. He had a relatively smooth win. But even in that game, white had the advantage and the chance for the advantage a couple of times, as I recall. I would like to have hoped that somehow these openings ended up being stronger than they actually are, but nothing that I saw has convinced me to take up any of these. I used to play the Grob. I never played the Borg. I experimented with it a couple of times. Really, the Grob, when you're playing somebody who knows what they're doing, it's just not a good opening. It really does deserve its terrible reputation, despite the fact that many white players are unfamiliar with the traps, particularly in the Claude Bloodgood handling of it, sacrificing the G-pawn. One thing you can say is that Basman is a real fighter, and to his credit, he came back from some pretty miserable positions in most of these games, and fought hard and found some excellent moves. So his experience in these bizarre positions, plus his strength as an international master, saw him through. But again, he is 67 years old, and he's mostly retired from serious play. Well, I'm glad to see he's still in action, and I hope he stays in action. Even if I don't play these openings, I enjoy watching him play them and seeing what happens. On another note, I did read that Botvinnik had a very high opinion of Basman when he saw him play as a youth, and thought that Basman had a bright future ahead of him. And I think I mentioned in the other video that Ray Keane said that Basman is really an excellent player and has more or less deliberately given his own career a disadvantage by playing these bizarre openings. When he played conventional openings, he was a force to be reckoned with. Well, he's still a force to be reckoned with, but it seems like he could have probably had a more successful career as a player had he stuck to more conventional paths. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this series. I'm going to go back to the Chess Beauty series for a little while until something exciting catches my eye. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.